Hey everybody, I'm Shane Ireland. Welcome to another episode of Tasting Notes. Today I have the great pleasure of discussing the most recent iteration of one of Cornell Diehl's, I would say, most popular small batch products, small batch 8 State Burley. Now, I think there's a handful of reasons why this was so well received the first time around. It is Jeremy Reeves, it's his tribute to sort of the classic American Burley blends of yesteryear. It's a very, very dynamic Burley. I think even with some decent aging potential. I'll talk about that in a little bit here. But it is augmented by some really interesting vintages of bright and red Virginia and some very, very mature Oriental leaf. Like I said, about as complex and dynamic as a Burley blend gets, in my opinion, or at least that I've experienced so far. It's a bit of a, I would say in terms of replay value, this is something you can smoke and will want to smoke pretty much all day long until you run out or until you show some restraint and let those tins sit in the cellar for a little while. So let me get into the tin note. I'll talk a little bit about the components. Man, right when I cracked this first tin, I was shocked at how naturally sweet the aroma is of the dried tobacco, or I should say the unburnt tobacco. There is a lot of sweetness here. I think that comes through in the blend, or at least the perception of sweetness comes through in the blend. But I say natural specifically because there's nothing cloying here. It has all of the sort of like faint cocoa notes and like a little bit of nuttiness that you would expect from a Burley. You do get a little bit of a sort of a perfumey type character, some aromatic qualities, like naturally occurring aromatic qualities. I'm going to go ahead and attribute that to the vintage Orientals from 2005. There's just a little bit of that sort of tangy and malty sweetness, I think, that's basically coming from both the air-cured leaf and the flue-cured leaf. But like I said, really the vintage Orientals are the star of the show here. That's evident in the tin note and in the smoke. So before I talk a little bit about what I'm actually tasting here, I wanted to talk a little bit about what comprises 8 State Burley. An impressive roster of mostly vintage leaf. The star of the show are white Burleys from 2014 and dark Burleys from 2015. To that, a little bit of 2018 Red Virginia from North Carolina is added, and a little bit of bright leaf from Canada, that's crop year 2019. I would say even more notably, 3 different heirloom Orientals from 2005, Catarini, Black Sea Sokum, and Samson. These Orientals do a lot. They're essentially air-cured variants themselves. They do a lot to add to the aromatic quality of this blend, the natural aromatic quality of this blend, and to sort of increase the interplay between the sort of more rustic Burley flavors, the more classic Burley flavors, and the nuance that air-cured leaf can provide a smoke. Right away from the initial light, I would say fans of classic Burley blends are going to be super pleased. Most notably, you get the 2014 and 2015 white and dark Burleys front and center. A little bit of depth, a little bit of that earthiness. I'm definitely getting some molasses sweetness. It's more like molasses or brown sugar than it is something a little bit brighter. Yeah, you get like the dried cocoa powder, a little bit of almost like a licorice vibe, and what else? Oh, nuttiness for sure. I mean, it really is all the classic, like sort of Burley air-cured, American air-cured flavor profiles. In addition to that, there's just a little bit more nuance, a little bit more depth. I think as the bowl progresses, you start to feel, maybe even more than taste, the influence of the 2005 Heirloom Orientals. They add to the natural aromatic quality of the blend, and they provide a really nice interplay between some of the more robust flavor, or I should say they facilitate a really nice interplay between some of the more robust flavors of the air-cured leaf and some of the nuance that leaf provides. As the bowl progresses, the sort of classic Burley flavors do amplify. I'm getting a lot more chocolate, a lot more nuttiness, a little bit more of that molasses vibe. And the Orientals really start to provide a lot more intrigue, particularly on the retrohale. You have these really lovely light vegetal notes that remind me a little bit of green tea. And also you have some like really aromatic, perfumey type things, especially on the retrohale. I wouldn't go as far as to call them floral. They're more herbal. It's more like aromatic herbs and spices than it is like floral, but it's definitely there. It plays really, really nicely with some of the drier notes from the air-cured leaf. And I would say that the Virginia grades here, you can definitely feel sort of the malty character of the red Virginias and a little bit of the sweetness of the bright leaf sort of along with the air-cured leaf, which is not sweet. It's just not as sweet. And really the sweet notes here for me range from something like amaretto, maybe all the way to like Boston cream pie. There are moments where I feel like the sweetness is super evident. It's a little bit fleeting, or I should say it dances in and out, which is kind of nice. Overall, I would say this has a little bit of a drier finish. But it's just really well balanced and really like sort of continues to shift back and forth between the more robust burley flavors and the sweetness. It occurred to me I was going to make an observation that actually this blend, I think, is a really decent crossover blend for smokers who might smoke more cigars than pipes. I mean, obviously cigars and burley blends have a lot in common, being both primarily made up of air-cured varietals, and the sort of like richer flavors, earthy flavors. And I was thinking that, yeah, I think somebody who enjoys cigars, particularly in the warmer months, would find Eight State Burley to be a really nice option in a pipe, very comforting. And yeah, you know, there's kind of a history of these sort of burley blends, these American-made burley blends being, you know, like a working man's smoke. And it kind of stands to reason that for whatever reason, there's this widely agreed upon thing that cigars in the warmer months are nice, pipes in the winter months and the cooler months are nice as well. And I think there is something to be said about air-cured blends, or primarily air-cured blends, being enjoyed in warmer weather. It just works. And yeah, like I said, they stand up to being smoked outdoors really well because they have the flavor and aroma that it's not just going to turn into something that's so light you can't appreciate it. So yeah, if you're normally a cigar smoker in the warmer months, give something like Eight State Burley a try. You'll be pretty surprised, I think. Today I'm smoking Cornell Diehl's small batch 8 State Burley in a little nose warmer by IMP. One of my go-to sort of tasting pipes. I have a handful of these, and I think that this blend and Burley blends in general perform incredibly well in meerschaum. I've also tasted this in a briar and clay, but yeah, if you're a meerschaum smoker and a fan of Burley, do yourself a favor and make that pairing because it works extremely well. I will say that there's been sort of a myth for a long time, or as long as aging tobacco has been in fashion, I should say. So over the last couple decades, as aging tobacco with the intent of enjoying it later on has increased in popularity, there's always been this sort of myth or opinion widespread that Burleys don't age that well. Now, I will say that they do age differently than Virginias, just like English blends age differently than Virginias. For me, Burley blends do not change a ton in the short term, but I do think long-term cellaring and long-term aging does have a positive effect on them. You get a lot more richness, a lot more depth, and even more sweetness the longer you let a Burley sit, whereas in the first like 3, 4, 5 years of a bright Virginia or red Virginia it being in the cellar, you're going to notice pretty significant differences. I tend not to notice differences in Burley until a few years out, even further than that. So I do think 8 State Burley, because of the components, because of the bright and red Virginias that have a decent sugar content, and because of the Oriental leaf in here, that vintage 2005 heirloom Orientals, this one will have long legs, but you got to be a little bit more patient than usual, I would say. So make sure you grab plenty to smoke now and plenty to try later on. I think the aromatic qualities of this tobacco, the natural aromatic qualities of this tobacco will increase over the years, and I think the sweetness will increase over the years, and it's going to end up being a really nice, rich, nearly dessert-like blend after some serious time in the cellar. Small batch 8 State Burley is sort of shockingly complex as the bowl progresses. Like I said, I still get plenty of chocolate, even nougat, amaretto notes, some more robust woody and earthy notes. It's really, really interesting, and the retrohale is amazing. I think that Burley fans, like if you grew up smoking Edgeworth, if you're still a fan of Solani's Aged Burley Flake or Wessex Burley Slices, any of the C&D Burley Flakes, 8 State Burley is a must try. I would also say that if historically you have veered towards other sort of styles of tobacco, 8 State Burley is really interesting in that it is simultaneously a tribute to the historic growing regions here in the U.S. that produce air-cured leaf. It's also a good showcase of how nuanced and sophisticated air-cured leaf can be. The addition of the bright and red Virginias and the Oriental grades from 2005 make this something that I think is much more approachable than even than Edgeworth was back in the day. But there's a reason that's a staple for so many smokers over the years, and that blends like it have been a staple for so many smokers over the years. It's comforting, easy to enjoy, has enough strength and flavor to keep a seasoned smoker satisfied, and really, if you slow down and pay attention, you really appreciate the nuance of this beautiful air-cured leaf, and just how good it can be with some age on it before or after production. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.